Hey, Stan Deaton with the Georgia Historical Society. Welcome back. This week marks the 79th anniversary of the bombing of Pearl Harbor and America's entry into World War II on December 7th, 1941, the date which will live in infamy, so described by President Franklin Roosevelt the next day when he addressed a joint session of Congress, the last time a president asked Congress for a declaration of war. That morning, over 2,400 American servicemen were killed, over 300 American ships destroyed, over 20 airplanes. 1,177 of those men were on the USS Arizona. Of all that number, 335 survived that day. There have been few other days like it in American history, the memory of which seared itself into the American collective consciousness. Probably the most famous being September 11th. 2001, when over 3,000 people died that morning. How does it compare to other days of American infamy, some of which we've talked about here on Dispatches before? April 19th, 1775, the day of the shot heard round the world, the events of Lexington and Concord, the first day of the American Revolution, when the British marched out of Boston to Lexington and Concord. It was called the Lexington Alarm then. Everyone remembered where they were when they heard about the events of that day. Two other April dates, 86 and 90 years later, seared themselves into our collective consciousness. April 12th, 1861, the day that the U.S. military installation at Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor was fired upon, the first day of the American Civil War. 4 years later, on April 14th, 1865, the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln. There were days like that in the 20th century. We've talked about April 12th, 1945, the day President Franklin Roosevelt died. November 22nd, 1963, the day of President Kennedy's assassination. Of course, everyone remembers where they were in the 4 days following his state funeral and burial in Washington. We mentioned September 11th. The bloodiest day in American history was during the American Civil War. September 17th, 1862, at the Battle of Antietam in Maryland, U.S. and Confederate casualties that day numbered over 23,000 killed or wounded. I mentioned that there were 1,177 deaths on the USS Arizona, 335 survivors. As of this day, December 7th, 2020, only 2 of those 335 are left, both 98 years old. Since 1982, the U.S. Navy has declared that any survivor of Pearl Harbor who wishes to can have their remains entombed on the USS Arizona, which still lies at the bottom of Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. And to date, over 30 U.S. servicemen have had their remains cremated, and divers have placed their remains under one of the gun turrets on the USS Arizona. As I mentioned, only 2 survive. We remember them and the day of infamy this week on the 79th anniversary of the bombing of Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. Stay safe, stay strong. I'm Stan Deaton with the Georgia Historical Society. As always, thank you for watching.